This video is brought to you by Kinetic 12.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. You know, I've never had to follow a politician before. I'm a little out of my element. But I will say that I'm glad to, between all the noise that we hear, to hear it straight sometimes, and that's just really fantastic. So I was glad to be able to listen to that. My job here today is to give you a peek into a paradigm that is going to shape our future. And I'm going to go about trying to do that by leaving you with what I call an intellectual hangover. And I describe an intellectual hangover. Some of you guys know about hangover. As I landed late last night, there was a lot of people at the bar till around 11 o'clock. An intellectual hangover is something where you hear it, you're excited about it that day, and when you get up in the next morning, you don't forget about it. You actually do something different. Now, we all go to conferences, and a lot of times you hear things, and you're excited about it that day, and you talk about it over networking, but by the time you get up in the next morning and you've slept, and you checked your text messages and your emails, and you text your spouse, you forgot about yesterday. So my job today is to leave you with an intellectual hangover around the topic of blockchain. Now, I've been studying blockchain for about 5 years now, and I've been building businesses in it, I've given talks in it, and I'm happy to tell you that I will be distributing Bitcoins to everyone after the speech. You know, if I actually had Bitcoins to distribute, I probably won't be doing this for a living. I sold my Bitcoins too early, that's why I'm still doing this for a living. So really quickly, to frame the conversation. Blockchain is a new technological paradigm, and like all paradigms, it's really difficult to understand what it is in the early stages of it. You get a lot of confusion. There's a lot of buzzword bingo. There's a lot of descriptions that you don't really understand, and you need to be able to parse it. So what I'm going to do today is to parse it for you a little bit. Blockchain affects industries, and it affects every single industry. Larry, thank you for getting me here. I'm really happy to be here. I've never spoken in the food industry before, and I want to make sure that we can change it. Now, most industries feel like this today. They feel like no matter what we do, we use cloud, we use mobile, we use AR, VR, AI, all sorts of stuff. It just doesn't feel like we're changing the model. It feels like we're layering new technology on top of an outdated model. And no matter how hard we try, we can get better, but we can't get exceptional. And that's because something is missing. Now, I think we're at a stage in history where the thing that is finally missing that we can put into industries is this thing called trust. And you will look at me for at least the next 5 minutes until I get to the middle of my speech like I'm crazy, because you're going to say, trust? What the hell is this kid talking about? I recognize that I'm younger than most of you. Trust, you know, that could have either been a joke or an insult, right? Trust is something that is very, very, very core to who we are as human beings. And as a result, it's core to commerce. Now, trust hasn't always been what it is today. It's been something that has evolved over time. And it has evolved over time, many times being driven by a change in commercial model. When we were sort of artisans, right, working in tribes, we trusted each other kind of how this guy looks on the chart over here. When we turned into soldiers, protecting sovereignties and kingdoms, we trust each other differently. On December 31st in the year 1600, Queen Elizabeth created something called the Limited Liability Corporation, which allowed us to trust completely differently. Today, we live in limited liability corporations, and we have an open permission to lie to each other about our products and services with this thing called marketing. And we can trust differently. So the point that I'm making is trust changes over time. And it's not in a constant state. Now, trust itself is very, very, very difficult. It's close to love. Anyone ever had a spouse or an ex-boyfriend or girlfriend cheat on you? It's very, very delicate. It's hard to get and easy to break. It's important in commerce, and somehow or the other, we do it. How do we do it? Well, we use things called contracts. We get a legal contract. I establish a legal contract with you, and so far I can trust you. Or we use things like familiarity. I've done business with you for a very long time, so I will trust you. And some of it, we just manufacture with our gut. We trust in the good of another human being. Think about, anybody here ever signed up for a website or downloaded an app and you have to do the terms and conditions where you have to agree? Anybody ever read it? You don't. Because if you read the whole thing, and if we all read the whole thing, commerce would come to a halt. So we manufacture a lot of trust with our gut as well. Now, the issue with manufacturing trust is that it takes time. It takes cost. It slows things down. It disrupts your supply chain. And trust in the digital economy today has a lot to do with data. We trust companies because we see their data. We trust people because we see their data. We trust a process because we can see the data of the process. Which brings us to the topic of our conversation, which is blockchain. How many people here have heard of blockchain? Raise your hands. Very good. Food industry is way ahead of the Wall Street guys. What I'd like for you to do for the next 30 minutes is to right-click on your brain. Some of you guys are like, yep, I know how to do that. Highlight all the stuff you know about Bitcoin and drop it in the recycle bin of your brain. Okay? This talk is not about Bitcoin. It's about blockchain, the underlying protocol. Now, in order to enable you to do this right-clicking, I need you to go through this with me very quickly. A protocol is a set of rules about how you do something. Now, the internet is a protocol. It's a set of rules about how we exchange information. Blockchain is a protocol. It's a set of rules about how we treat data, which I will go through with you on the talk. What you need to come with me on this journey on to realize is that when the internet was first invented, there were multiple versions of the internet. There was ARPANET, there was DARPANET, there was www. I mean, there was like hundreds of versions of the internet. And then the IEEE was established, and we agreed on the World Wide Web. And the internet protocol enabled us to do many interesting things. Just like that, blockchain has many instantiations. Today, there's a Bitcoin blockchain. There's an Ethereum blockchain. There's a Ripple blockchain. There's a Hyperledger blockchain. So you have to be able to separate Bitcoin from the actual protocol because there are multiple instantiations of it. Bitcoin is to blockchain what AOL chat was to the internet. Just the first instantiation of it. So leave all of that aside. Don't get distracted by that. Focus on the protocol itself. Make sense with everyone? Okay, don't worry. You could take it out of the recycle bin after my talk. So what is the problem that blockchain solves? Well, you'd imagine since I started with trust, blockchain probably solves for trust, or this would be a terrible talk. Blockchain solves for something that is very core to us called trust, and it solves for trust in commerce. And in order to instantiate an example for you, I'm going to invite you to go on this journey with me. Anybody here rich enough to afford a car like this? It's an awkward question. No one should raise their hands because it's like you don't want to say that, right? But let's say that you're super wealthy and you can afford this Rolls Royce on this screen right here. And how do you know you're super wealthy? When the back seat of your car is more comfortable than the front seat of your car. That's how you know, okay? And you decide to hire me to be your private chauffeur. And I'm going to drive around your family for you, okay? So I agree to drive around your precious family for you. And you want to go check my record with the Department of Motor Vehicles, my driver record, to make sure that I don't have speeding tickets and DUI and all that type of stuff. And I come to you and I say, hey, don't do that. I've got an Excel spreadsheet here of my own driver record. I am notorious for keeping driver records. I have every entry, every speeding ticket, every stoplight. Heck, I have selfies with every cop that ever pulled me over right here in this Excel file. Don't go to the DMV. Just take this file. It is my driver record. Please take it. How many people will take it? Nobody. And the reason why you wouldn't do that is because you don't have an easy way to test to see whether that data is good or not. You have to go to this thing called an intermediary, which is the Department of Motor Vehicles, to test to see if that data is good. And that's because data that we have today looks like this. While I take a sip of water, I'll allow you guys to take a look at what may or may not be my actual driver record. So most data today in all of your companies, all of our companies, looks like this. And the issue with it is that if someone doesn't like a few records in a database, or they don't like a few transactions in something, they can easily, you can see why I wouldn't like those 3 records, right? They can easily go in there and do this to the driver record. And when you get that driver record, you don't have a simple way to test to see whether it was changed by someone. And hence, you have to have contracts, you have to have intermediaries, you wait a lot to be able to verify stuff, you need to merge databases and build integration systems and all this type of stuff, disrupting your supply chain. Now, blockchain driver records work a little bit differently. Blockchain driver records work like this. The first thing that happens on a blockchain record is on the left-hand side of this screen in the bottom. It has to be written by someone that has permission to write it. And so you see the DMV writing that first record over there. That doesn't really change it that much from that Excel file that I was going to give you, the lie-infested Excel file. But what changes it really importantly is what's on the right side of this chart. Every blockchain record has what is called a unique key that is given to it. Now, what is used here is asymmetric cryptography to give what's called a SHA-256 key. I don't think you have to worry about how that works. What you need to walk away with is that this key is very difficult right now to replicate. So it's very unique. Yes, maybe 100 years from now when we have super duper quantum computing, someone might be able to replicate it. But right now, within the limits of what we believe, the key is really difficult to replicate. Still not that different from the Excel file, right? You're like, yep, this is okay, but I don't see why this is such a big deal. Here's why this becomes a big deal. On blockchain records, when the second record has to be written, the formula that created the first key for the first record takes the entire contents of the first record, including the key, and the contents of the second record as the input to the formula, and then derives a key for the second record. So the first record had a key that was created without any input to the formula. The second record takes the entire first record with the key, the second record, and kicks out a key for the second record. Here you can see that the key for the second record is dependent on the first record, including the key for the first record. Let's do that one more time. When the third record is written, what happens? All of the contents of the first record, including the key, plus the contents of the second record, including the key for the second record, which was derived from the first record, plus the third record, goes back into the formula, and out comes a key for the third record. Here you see technology, again, asymmetric cryptography, being used to chain one record to another by creating these dependent keys. And that happens over and over and over, essentially technology chaining records together. So now you understand where the syllable chain comes from in the phrase blockchain. I could drop the mic now and everybody's good, right? Okay, so if someone decides that they don't like these three records over here, and they want to remove it or edit it or change it, that algorithm that creates those keys as a public algorithm can very quickly be used to see when someone tampers with the data. Very quickly and very inexpensively. This is very different from the Excel file that I was going to give you. Does that make sense? So for the first time in commerce, we are able to leverage a technology that reduces the time and the cost that is required to verify data. And I want you to think about your supply chain and the food chain in all of your relationships with your partner ecosystems and your suppliers. How much time and cost do you spend verifying data to make sure that what is there is trustable. Essentially, the opportunity in front of us, or the threat in front of us, is that for the first time in our species, we can go from a world that builds businesses where data comes to us currently on the left hand of this screen, and it winks at us and says, trust me, you can trust me, to a world where on the right-hand side of the screen, data comes to us, and it has a very easy and simple way to test to see what changes were made and whether they were made by those that have malintent or not. This is the first and fundamental invention of blockchain. It is fundamentally different how we go about dealing with data. Today we live in a world where data can be easily massaged for good or for bad. I love when I have my staff meetings and my staff presents to me how we're doing on some project or the quarter or something like that. And the PowerPoint presentation, gets presented to me. And I like to stop and go, guys, I don't want to see the front of the deck. I just want to go right to the appendix. And they're like, why? We did so much work to prepare the front and prepare it with lies for you. Why would you want to go to the back? That's where all the truth is. Think about that for a second. We as a species do not share information until we've prepared it for the other person to see it. Fundamental in our DNA. Businesses do it, human beings do it, governments do it, news organizations do it, everybody does it. And we have a paradigm in front of us where particularly that new generation is looking at it going, nah, I just want to build systems where I can trust the data. I don't want someone to be able to massage it before me. And this is what's creating the opportunity and the threat at the same time. Now, the issue with blockchain, or the opportunity with blockchain, is that it is moving exponentially fast. I was talking to Lara earlier this morning, and Lara said to me, hey, I heard about this thing 3 months ago when Larry discovered you from your TEDx talk, and I can't believe how much it's actually starting to explode just in 90 days. This thing is moving about 10 times the speed of the internet. We're seeing use cases go from financial data, which is basic Bitcoin and currency, to identity data. Think about identity data on a blockchain. Think about things like reputational data on a blockchain, inventory data for those who manipulate supply and demand for pricing, market data. Anybody here ever bought something that's limited edition? How do you know it's limited edition? Because they tell you. There could be another 100 selling in Singapore. You have no idea. Agreement data, cooperate data. I want to talk about reputation data pretty quickly. I have a personal example to share you with reputation data. As a hobby investment, I happen to own a restaurant in the town that I live in. I'm not a restaurateur. I don't know anything about restaurants. I just love the restaurant. It was being sold, and my wife and I bought it. And I don't look at the restaurant at all. I have a manager that manages it, and then I go there and I eat for free. Yep. But what I do look at is I look at the Yelp reviews. And every time I see a good Yelp review, I'm like, yes. And when I see a bad Yelp review, I'm like, oh man, what happened? So the other day, about maybe 3-4 months ago, I saw a Yelp review, 1 star. So of course, I look at it right away. It was someone who bought our shrimp meal, and our shrimp meal is supposed to have 6 jumbo shrimp in it, and it's a fantastic meal. So I read the review, and the review was, great restaurant, great ambiance, food was fantastic, but I got 5 shrimp out of 6. And I was really looking forward to that 6 shrimp, 1 star. And I'm like, oh man, this sucks. That's not a 1-star review. Like, I'm really sorry you missed out on the shrimp. The chef screwed up really bad, but that's at a minimum like a 3-star review, right? It's not a 1-star. So I figured I'm going to call this person. I'm going to talk to them. So I click on the profile on Yelp. It's a picture of a cat in the profile picture, and the name of the reviewer is Cat Lover 231. Can't find him. So I started doing some research. Turns out 33% of Yelp reviews are fake. I then realized that my competitors actually pay people to write bad reviews about my restaurant. I had no idea. Okay? So my students at Syracuse are actually building an exercise for their class this semester where we're recreating the entire restaurant industry from the ground up on blockchains. And one of the use cases in there is when you have to write a review for a restaurant, the contracts inside of there, and we'll talk about contracts in a second, is that first, I have to verify your identity. I have to bounce off of the point of sale system that you actually purchased the meal that you're critiquing, and I have to bounce off of the credit card company that you actually had a transaction at that restaurant, and the GPS on your phone has to put you in the restaurant at that time before your review is posted. Now you can build that with basic databases, but the problem is it's very expensive and you got to get a whole bunch of people to agree on a whole bunch of things before you can get it done. The power of blockchain is that in the fabric itself, you cannot screw around with the data, and that's why you can build these what are called trust use cases, okay? The second thing with blockchain, so I talked about the first thing, where did the chain come from? Guess what I'm going to talk about next? Where does the block come from? All right, everybody's awake. If that was all that blockchain was, which was the chaining of records, it would not be as disruptive as it is. It would have kind of been like cloud, okay? Everybody would have survived. You just have to figure out how to get Microsoft or IBM or one of these guys to take you to the cloud, okay? The second part of blockchain is what makes it very, very, very disruptive. And here's what the second part is. Blockchain enables you to scale consensus and automation by adding these things called smart contracts to data. Now, smart contracts are very simple. They're just like the contracts that we have today that we pay lawyers to facilitate for us, except those rules are embedded into the data, and because the data is easy to verify, things can happen very quickly. And I'll explain to you how that works. Most data today actually have rules in them. Most databases have rules in them. Anybody here has an IT background? Wow. Lara, we're going to need more time. So most databases have rules in them right now. The rules are what are called CRUD rules. Create, update, read, delete. Can you create a record? Do you have permission to delete a record? Are you violating a primary key? A primary key is a unique key for every record, right? Like you can't write record number 2 twice, okay? On blockchains, because the data is easily verifiable, you can take the risk to write other types of rules into the data layer. Things like industry regulations can be written into the data layer because you don't need a human being to check to see the data and inspect what massaging was done to it. You can actually write stuff that actually depends on the data. Things like business processes can now be embedded in the data layer. And then new opportunities, which are things that we never thought about putting contracts around or never thought about embedding in any of the application layer, can now go into technology because it's easier and cheaper and faster to do. These things are called smart contracts, and it's essentially taking a lot of the stuff that we weigh on each other and we pay for verification and we pay for integration systems, and it embeds it into the technology. Now, if we go back to my DMV example for a second. A smart contract in my DMV example would be that the police officer cannot write the record to the Department of Motor Vehicles until my car, the computer system in my car, verifies that I was actually going that speed at that time. And my iPhone's GPS actually verifies that I was there at that location at that time. That's an example of a smart contract. And blockchains allow you to embed that into the data, to take out all of the noise out of it. Again, think about your use cases, think about your industry, think about your supply chain. And a lot of this happens over time, and then around some agreed block of time, whether it's 10 seconds or 10 hours, it's never 10 days. There are algorithms that are run to heal the network. And why do you have to heal the network? You have to heal the network because smart contracts are written between multiple parties. So each party here will have different rules and different smart contracts over them. And just in case someone wants to break the rules, there are algorithms that takes all the smart contracts and look at all the transactions on the database since the last time it was healed. Over that block of time, it finds the ones that didn't follow the smart contracts, expires them, rewrites them with the ones that should be right. And essentially, over every block of time, the data gets healed. And that's where block in the word blockchain comes from. I want to repeat that very quickly because this one's a little bit more complex than the first one, where chain comes from. Smart contracts allow agreements, business processes that rely on verified data to be done automated without humans intervening. Now, many of those can exist within an ecosystem and a set of parties. People, human beings, because we're imperfect, will want to sometimes violate certain smart contracts. A consensus algorithm running on the blockchain will look at all the transactions since the last time the block was verified and see who actually violated the contracts, pops them out, and only writes the records of the people who followed the contracts and heals the database over that block of time. Okay? That's where the word block comes from. The beautiful thing about blocking is that you can see who actually followed the rules and who didn't follow the rules. And so without knowing a counterparty, without knowing a business partner, without knowing a supplier, you can very easily calculate a trust score in your mind about whether they're trustable to do business or not without ever meeting them or ever establishing a contract, because you can see whether they were following the rules or they're constantly violating the rules. Now, their records that they violated don't make it in, but you can see that they violated it. And what this allows you to do is it allows you to start to build business processes on a maturity curve where you can trust counterparties easier. Early use cases are intra-company or intra-organization. Then you can think about intra-organization and intra-industry. These are the people that you already know, but you don't really trust. Then you can think about inter-industry and intra-geography. These are the people that you don't know, and as a result, you don't trust. And then eventually, inter-geographies, those that I don't know as yet. There's a Donald Rumsfeld quote in here somewhere, but I'll leave that for maybe Q&A. So if you think about this paradigm and you think about where you're sitting today, you're sitting in the middle of change of your industry. You've got cloud, you've got mobile, you've got social, you've got, I don't know how much AR and VR you guys do in the food industry as yet. Maybe I should do my research. But you've got all these paradigms moving, but all of them basically just allows you to put a stronger Band-Aid on top of an outdated model. No industry today is broken. They're working as exactly as designed 100 years ago. No industry is broken. They're just working as designed. We just haven't redesigned them. What blockchain allows us to do is to start to think about how we can redesign our industries. If you take the two things that I talked about, chaining being on the x-axis and blocking being on the y-axis, chaining allowing you to trust new information ecosystems with lower cost of verification, and blocking allowing you to transact with new business partners in a more familiar way without having to establish familiarity with trust, you start to see that this gives you an opportunity to create completely new industry structures, kind of like the one that I talked to you about with the Yelp review just now. Making sense so far? Okay. Now, blockchain itself is creating a wind tunnel for other technologies to move faster. AI doesn't change commerce the way blockchain changes commerce. IoT doesn't change commerce the way blockchain changes commerce. But what blockchain does is it empowers these to be able to move even faster. I'll talk about IoT really quickly. If you've never heard of IoT before, basically it's the notion of connecting all the things that weren't meant to be computers to the internet. Okay? It's a very large industry. It's all the wearables and endpoints and sensors that we all hear about all the time. I created a very quick maturity model about 5 years ago to think about what IoT is. Because I'm currently deployed in healthcare, I started to think about my body. What will I have in my body, things that are around my body, things that I carry around. And here you can see all the paradigms of IoT being created. Digital health, wearable clothing, connected homes, smart cities, supply chains, connected governments, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? But IoT is just new endpoints and new data sets. Okay? And when you take IoT and you apply it to what blockchain is, what essentially happens is this chart gets smaller, and you're looking at even newer data streams from all these sensors, and even newer participants, non-human participants in the network, which are these smart devices and endpoints, and you start to recognize that both the opportunity and the threat in front of us is that someone is going to start to create truly trusted companies. You may or may not have a book in front of you, depending on how it was distributed. The subtitle of the book is "Every Company is at Risk of Being Disrupted by a Trusted Version of Itself." Our consumers are looking for trust. We are currently living in an experience economy. The last economy we lived in was a product and pricing economy. And in the product and pricing economy, the competitive landscape allowed incumbents to be optimized to win because size and scale can help you drive pricing and product quality. In the current economy that we're in, which is the experience and engagement economy, incumbents can make it, but a fast follower can really, or a challenger can enter the market and win with experience, right? Being a first to market is okay, but a fast follower can take you over. In the trust and transparency economy, which will be largely driven by blockchain, the paradigm, things get a little difficult. Trust is a one-shot game. Once you're trusted, kind of easy to lose your trust. But once you're untrusted, it's really hard to gain the trust back. So in the trust economy that's coming, where consumers are looking for trust, it's really, really, really important that you get your experience and your guidance and your thinking and you inform your actions from different places. I love Gartner and I love McKinsey and I respect those guys. My family works for them, but they're not going to be able to get you into the trust economy. They're going to get you through the experience economy and the engagement economy. This is a tsunami, and it is hitting every single industry at the same time. It's not about recreating companies. It's about recreating ecosystems or new industries to almost rewrite history. And I think the food industry has a really, really interesting opportunity here. I'll tell you a last story before we go into Q&A. You might ask, maybe you don't ask, I'll just tell you. Anybody right-clicked on their brain as yet to bring out back the Bitcoin stuff? Nope, still there? Good, good. You might ask, Richie, why did you get into this? Why are you so passionate about it? Why do you take the time to travel across the world and talk to people about this? Part of it is I truly believe that as a human being, we should be able to contribute in some meaningful way to the world. The other part of it is I was inspired by the youth, particularly with my work at the university. About 3 or 4 years ago, I happened to be in Saudi Arabia giving another talk at the time about IoT and AI, and I stayed a couple of days and I went on one of those rides where you kind of like throw up through the dunes, right, and you go through that stuff. And they finally take you to a hill where you can take a picture of yourself with the sunset. I don't know if you guys have been on this ride, but it's like one of the things in the stop. You go on this sand hill, and there's a beautiful sunset, in the Arabian sort of part of the world there, and you take a picture. And when you take a selfie, especially a guy like me, you take a selfie of yourself in the sunset, you look like a dark silhouette because of the iPhone lighting, right? So there was a female teenager, standing right in front of me and a couple of my friends. I said, hey, can you take a picture of us? And she said, of course. So she takes my iPhone, and I'm trying to give her instructions about, adjust the lighting, and she's like, I got it, don't worry. And she takes a picture of me and my buddies perfectly with the sunset behind us, perfect lighting. I look at her, I'm like, wow, that's pretty good. How did you even do that? And she said, oh, I know how to write code, and I know about phones and all this type of stuff. And I'm like, wow, this is amazing. So anyway, we go off to dinner. It's one of those dinners where you sit down flat with everyone and you ride a camel and you eat all sorts of food. And my buddies and I had a couple of too much beers, and we're arguing about artificial intelligence versus artificial consciousness. And we're getting a little loud. The same teenager that helped us take the picture happened to be sitting in the table behind us. She sneaks over and says, hey, can I join the conversation with you guys? And real quickly, as grown men, we looked around like, where's the dad? Right? Like, hey, is this okay? And he goes, yeah, that's fine. So she sits down and she starts talking to us about AI and about artificial intelligence. Turns out she's 13. They're traveling from Barcelona. She writes code. She has her own programs, all this type of stuff. And I'm just blown away. So I stopped and I said to her, and this is a true story. It started my inspiration in blockchain. I said, can I ask you a question? What does your generation want from technology? Do you guys want bigger screens, faster connections, better phones, Tinder for everything? What do you guys want? She was 13. She's probably 16 now. She looked up and thought for a second. And she looked at the four morons that had too many beers that are arguing about AI. And she said, you know what I really want? I just want to know that when I walk into a store and I buy something and I turn it around and I look at the back and it says no sugar, I just want a really easy way to know that there's actually no sugar in there. That's the next generation. They want trusted commerce. There's a maturity model for this in the book. We can talk about use cases afterwards. Larry and Laura has my contact information if you wanted to talk through this. Step 1 is to listen to the talk. Step 2 is to at least read the last 3 chapters of the book. Thank you very much. All right, so I got a couple of questions here. I'll take a few of these. So the first question is, how are the blockchain instantiations different? So I talked about there being different instantiations of the protocol. So really quickly, the Bitcoin blockchain was invented about 7-8 years ago. It's probably the oldest version of it. It has 3 flaws to it. I'll give you the 3 flaws very quickly. One is, the counterparty on each end doesn't have to disclose their identity on the Bitcoin blockchain. That's a really, really bad thing because you don't have to disclose identity, which means you have trading partners who are from the dark web that are washing their money. Okay? That's the first thing. Ethereum, Hyperledger, Ripple, Corda, all the rest of blockchain fabrics, you have to see identity on the other side. That's the first thing. The second thing with the blockchain protocol is that you cannot write business transactions on top of it because it doesn't have a true programming language on top of it. The only transactions you can write are very simple, and that's why double-sided spending, which is the problem with currency, is what was written on the Bitcoin blockchain. You can't build true business applications on top of it. Again, the other blockchains like Ethereum, like Corda, like Ripple, like Sawtooth, like Hyperledger, you can write JavaScript on top of it, so your smart contracts can be a little bit more intelligent. That's the second thing wrong with the Bitcoin blockchain. The last thing with the Bitcoin blockchain that I will share with you is that it runs what is called proof of work. It's a consensus algorithm. Remember I talked about how the blocks get healed over time? It runs proof of work, which means that anyone can get in and they can use their computing power to try to find the truth by applying all the smart contracts to see who's lying and who's not lying. And eventually, as long as they find a version of the truth, they get paid with the Bitcoin, which has value, and that's why they spend their computing power. Proof of stake, which Ethereum runs and the other blockchains run, says, listen, don't waste your electricity, everybody, to go do that. We'll just round robin those who have a stake in the sanctity of the ecosystem. You go off and spend your electric power this time. Once you find truth, let us know. We can all test it very quickly. You can't lie about it. And then we'll just heal the block and we'll move on. Now, here's the problem with proof of stake versus proof of work. So proof of work on Bitcoin, the amount of electricity used by all of the people mining one Bitcoin, which only pays about, what, $6,000 or $7,000 now, is about $1 million of electricity. It won't scale. This is why people who understand the protocol are not betting on Bitcoin And this is why people who are trying to make a fast buck are betting on Bitcoin. The other protocols, obviously, it's running proof of stake. You round robin, one person spends the electricity, it's fraction of $1 million, and then you move it around that way. I'm out of time. I've only got 20 seconds left. I can take questions in afterwards. You can feel free to right-click in the recycled bin of your brain and bring it back in. I hope that this was helpful. I thank you, and I hope that you change your industry. Thank you very much.